Hello and welcome to this noon edition of our live Facebook show. We usually broadcast at night, and I'm going to switch things up and see if this noon hour works better for families to be able to maybe use some of your lunch break to join us. But thank you for being here, either with us live or watching the replay. I wanted to talk about how we can figure out if your child's IEP is being implemented with fidelity at your school and how confident you are about that. So today we're going to be looking at three specific strategies for how you can find out what's happening at your child's school. Now, if you were with us last week, Dr. Julie Costin from Syracuse University was our guest, and one of the tips that Julie gave us was how important it is for parents to really know what's happening in their child's school, in their classrooms, and different places around the school building. And I thought that would make a great follow-up for this week's show. If you did not catch our show last week and you'd love to hear more from Julie Costin and what she shared with us about including students with disabilities, just type in Julie in the link below or in the comment box below, and I'll make sure that I come back after the show and give you that link for last week's show. So I wanted to officially welcome you to the Art of Advocacy show. Like I said, today's show is how to know what's happening at your child's school. So if you aren't familiar with our show and who I am, I'm Charmaine Thaner. I'm a parent, a retired teacher, and advocate now for students with disabilities. And one of the things that I have done, I guess it was a couple years ago now, was to write a book for parents, and it's called The Art of Advocacy, A Parent's Guide to a Collaborative IEP Process. And so just a quick reminder that this book is available on Amazon. You can get the Kindle version for 99 cents, and the paperback is also available. But that's a resource that I hope parents will tap into. And it seems like right now in the springtime, it's been a popular bestseller. So it's exciting to see that it has in fact been really valuable for parents. So thank you for stopping by Amazon and picking up your copy of that. But let's look at our three strategies that we're going to focus on today. So our first strategy for trying to figure out what's going on at your child's school is to look at some of the clues that you can find at school. Now, recently I talked to a mom, and she said that her son was included in specials, in lunch, in recess with his general education classroom. And that was all that he was being included in during the typical school day. And so I said, well, when kids only go to specials and lunch and recess, it's really more like being a visitor in the general ed classroom than really being a member of that class. And so mom happened to be at school one day during lunchtime. She thought she would surprise her son and go down to the lunchroom and have lunch with him. And she was really surprised when she walked in the lunchroom and saw him eating at a separate table. The only other people sitting at that table was a paraprofessional and another student from the special education class. And mom was kind of shocked at first and then disappointed because it's like, what? I thought lunch was one of those times that he was going to be included with his general ed class. So she had a conversation with the teacher, which is always a good strategy to start with the teacher first. And the teacher said, well, that's where he chooses to eat lunch. And so we wanted to give him that choice. Well, unfortunately, sometimes students, because they aren't really included in the classroom and because they don't see those other students in the classroom as being peers, it can be really awkward and really hard for a young elementary student to know how he can, ask to sit with other students, or if he feels excluded, he's not going to continue to put himself out there to want to be with his peers. So we had to do some brainstorming around, friendship strategies and other things like that. But we'll have to save all the friendship tips for another show. But what I wanted to bring this example up because what it shows is by the mom just bopping into school one day and wanting to surprise her son and having lunch with him, she actually found out what was happening. She thought her son was included in eating at least lunch with peers. And what she found out was, no, that wasn't happening. So our first strategy of finding clues at school is really important. You find a lot out by actually being in the school building. Now, I know it's hard because, most of us are working parents and, we don't have the opportunity to necessarily spend, a great deal of amount of time in our child's classroom. But if you can find those times during the day when you can go for a quick visit, or if you want to volunteer to help in the classroom, if you want to, spend any time observing your child at school, make sure that you talk to the staff and see how you can have that be a possibility. Most schools have some kind of visitor policy or a policy about observing in classrooms. So as a parent, you just want to check out what those policies are ahead of time, make the necessary arrangements. But I really do encourage you to find some time during the school year when you can actually go to the building to see what's happening there. So we have a couple people with us on live right now, so welcome. And what I thought it would be helpful is if you could type in the comment box if you've made observations or if you visited your child's school, what kinds of things did you find out? If you can type that in the comment box, then we can share, and this can be more interactive instead of me just being the one sitting here talking with you. But what kinds of clues do you feel like you could figure out, or you could act upon, or would be productive for you to find out about if you actually went into the school building? So let's see, we've got a couple people here. We do have like a time delay of a little bit, so I want to make sure that if you want to make a comment that I give you time to type that in, or you can say hello and then I know who we have with us live. But the other thing is, what I did was I tried to brainstorm, if you go into the school environment, what is it that you can actually see? So I'll share some of my thoughts with you. And if you have additional things, please jump in and type them in the comment box. But I think when you go to school, there's several different things that you can find out. One, you can see where your child is getting their instruction. So is the instruction happening in the general ed room? Is it happening in the special ed room? Is it happening in the hallway? And then compare with what the IEP says as far as where your child's supposed to be getting his instruction and support services. The other thing that you can see when you're at school is who is giving your child the instruction. So if in the IEP it says that the special education teacher will be providing the instruction, and when you go to make a visit at the school, you don't see the special education teacher working with your child, but instead you see a paraprofessional working with your child, and that's not what the IEP says, that would be a conversation that you'd want to bring up with the teacher. So you can find out where they're getting the instruction, who's giving it to them. You can also find out what kind of work that your child is actually doing. I don't know if this happens to you, but a lot of times parents will ask their kids, like, how was your day today? What was an exciting part of the day? What did you like? And a lot of times kids just kind of shrug their shoulders or maybe kind of mumble something. It's especially challenging if your child doesn't use verbal speech to be able to have a conversation about what happened at school. So by you being able to make some periodic, little visits to the school, that can be one way that you find out exactly what kinds of work they're working on. Ask the teacher to send some of that home. And we'll talk about some communication logs near the end of our show and how we can use technology too. But I think probably the best way to see if your IEP is really being implemented like it's written is to actually go to the school in person. The other thing that you can find out is who are some of your child's friends. Relationships are so critically important for all of us, not just for students, but for adults. And certainly we want our kids making friends and having those reciprocal relationships in the school setting. So the some other things that these clues can tell you is, what does your child like to do at recess? Do you see him playing games with other kids? Do you see him sitting on a bench by himself? Is he starting to use some of the playground equipment? Is he having a hard time negotiating the playground on, walking around it, or, depending on what your child's needs are? So not only looking at what's happening inside the school building, but looking at, times like recess and how that's working out for your child. As the example that we talked about a minute ago was, who does your child sit next to at lunch? If they're listing on the IEP that lunchtime is one of those times that counts for general education inclusion, you want to check that out and see exactly what that looks like. Also, you can see how easily does your child seem to be doing their schoolwork. Is the teacher giving, instruction for the whole class and then they break up and do some independent work? Does your child get any additional support during that independent work time? What does that really look like? Another clue that you can use is basically, does your child seem happy at school? Now, you might be saying, what? There's no measurable goal in my child's IEP to say he's going to be happy at school. And I'm sure that's true. I don't think I've ever seen an IEP that has a happy goal in it. But what I think it shows us, if we can see for ourselves if our child seems to feel safe, if they feel secure, if they feel that sense of belonging, if they are happy being in the school building, that tells you a lot. On the other hand, if you see your child being pretty, sullen and alone a lot of the time, not engaging with peers, that can be a huge red flag for you that we need to look at what's happening and what's not happening. And, it could be maybe some additional accommodations are needed in the IEP, or, the placement in the IEP needs to be looked at again. But I think just as a mom, knowing if our kids feel safe, secure, and happy is a barometer that we can use to figure out if things are going well at school or not. So let's see if anybody's got any comments or questions. We have some people watching us live, so if you want to give us a shout out, give us a thumbs up if this is being helpful. Sherry is on. So Sherry, hey, she said You mentioned getting reports. How do I get the school to do that? So that's great, Sherry, because that's exactly what we're going to be talking about next. So the next strategy is to improve what's written in progress reports and how often you get them. Now, Sherry, unfortunately, is saying that she's not even getting the reports to begin with. So that's a huge concern. What you need to do is go back through the IEP, and in the section where the annual goals are written, there should be usually a place under the goals. Sometimes it's above, but it should say something in there about how often you're going to get progress reports. A lot of times there'll be just a generic statement, and it will say progress reports will be sent home as often as report cards are, or it might say quarterly progress reports are given. But it is a responsibility of the school team to give parents reports. So, Sherry, what you could do is you could set up a time to have a conversation with your teacher and say, I'm just concerned because it doesn't seem like I'm getting any reports. What I have noticed recently, because of all the technology, parents used to get paper, reports that were sent home in the backpack or mailed. And now so many schools have, this parent portal or Power School that they call it, and they don't send home paper copies of reports, and they expect parents to go on the internet to the school's website and they can read the report there. So Sherry, I think if you have a conversation with the teacher and just clarify and say, I understand, I need to be getting reports on my child's progress with his IEP goals. Does this school send home paper copies? Am I supposed to go on the internet and find the report? But yeah, that's an obligation. So you've got to get a report one way or the other. The other thing that I would suggest, if the school says, oh, we don't give paper copies anymore, parents just go on the internet. And if you don't have internet connection, as when we go into parent-teacher conferences, many times the teacher is not even up to date on grades. I hear he's doing good, he's getting D's. How can that be, doing good? So I think, you've pinpointed some of the challenges right there. So before a parent-teacher conference, what you could do, especially if you notice this is a pattern, is to say, a few days before the conference, I know our conference is coming up on Wednesday at 11. Please make sure that you have work samples that you can show me from my child's works, and also have the grades calculated and be able to help us understand why he's getting that grade. Now your parent-teacher conferences have already happened probably, because we're looking at near the end of the school year, unless you're on a year-round school. But there's no reason why you can ask for another time that you could go in and sit down with the teacher. And I would have the special ed teacher be there, the general ed teacher, and yourself at a minimum. Depending on your age of your child, some kids will go to their own parent-teacher conferences. So, that would be a consideration. But you could just say, I'm frustrated because I feel like I'm not getting a good picture of how things are working out at school. Can we set up a time that we can talk? Now, you can do that, like I said, just as an informal parent-teacher conference. If you want to formalize it and possibly make some amendments to the IEP, then as a parent, call an IEP meeting, request an IEP meeting in writing, and say, we need to meet, we need to look at what the current progress is, if we want to make any amendments to how often I'm receiving progress notes, or what's inside, the progress notes, as far as me being able to tell exactly, what my child's been doing, what new skills he's learned, what he's still struggling with. So set up a time informally to talk with the teachers, or request an IEP meeting would be my best advice right now. And Sherry, thanks for asking those. And if you've tried that and it hasn't worked, like type that in the comments, and we can keep brainstorming some other next steps that you could take. But with the strategy of progress reports, what I find is that sometimes they really don't tell parents much information. I mean, progress reports really should be helping you as the parent and the staff know how much progress your child's making on each of those IEP goals. So if you get a progress report that just says 2, in progress, or satisfactory, to me as a mom, that doesn't really help me know, what has my child learned since the last time we got a progress report, and are things going well? Because, like I said, the progress report should also be helping the teacher figure out, are my instructional strategies working? Are the behavior interventions that we have in place really being helpful, and are they positive for the student? So if the teacher gives you progress reports with hardly any information besides a letter or something like that, it's hard for the teacher to know, do I need to make any changes? So what I encourage parents to do is to actually have a discussion about progress reports in an IEP meeting. Like I said, a lot of times it's just generic, like these will be sent home as soon as report cards are sent home. But you can individualize your progress report. So you can say, even though the district uses this number code or whatever to, tell us the progress, that really doesn't give us enough information, and you can write in the IEP, the progress report will be a summary of data that's been collected, and also a narrative summary of my child's progress. So one, you want to make sure that progress is measured on some objective way, and you should always have data collection being one of those ways to measure it. So if in the IEP it says we're going to measure your child's progress weekly with a weekly data collection, or we're going to do it, every 2 weeks or every month, then when you get that progress report, they should summarize what that data collection is showing them. And then I always think it's helpful for them to also include, it can be just a few sentences of a narrative explaining what kinds of activities, what kinds of skills your child's working on. So if you don't have that in your IEP now, which chances are, I would be really surprised if somebody had all of that individualized now. If you don't have the progress reports individualized in your IEP, that's something I would request an IEP meeting for and get an amendment for that. If we look at, like I said, that should be helping the teachers know if they need to make any adjustments. A lot of times teachers will look at either 4 or 6 weeks of data, and then they should be able to tell, is this strategy really helping, or the child still isn't making progress? And then as a teacher, what do I need to do to change that? Unfortunately, way too often I see teachers blaming students if they haven't made progress, instead of looking at, as the adult in the classroom, as the professional in the classroom, what can I do differently to help support this student, versus, the student is just not willing to do the work, or, whatever other kinds of things that they like to, kind of blame the student for a lack of progress. So instead, I want the teachers, being able to share with you as a parent, well, we've tried this for reading, we've used this kind of strategy, we're using the basal reader, it just doesn't seem to be working. I don't think your child's going to be a very successful reader. So instead, change that, switch that up and say, well, look, if we look at the type of learner my child is, We've talked in the IEP meetings, it's in his IEP that he needs a multisensory approach to reading. Is that being used at school? If not, can we try using that and see if that makes a difference? So it should be this give and take conversation about progress, and it shouldn't just be a report with a couple, numbers or letters on it sent home to you. It really should be meaningful information, not only for you, but it really should be informing what the teacher does in the classroom based on the progress that your child's making. So another thing about progress reports is not only what's written in the progress report, but also how often you get those. And Tracy's on here. So she says that, or he just shuts down. And that Tracy said, this will be great for my IEP this afternoon. So yay, I'm glad that we're doing this early for you, Tracy. For sure, talk about progress reports. So let's get into this next part here, because so many times what schools do is they look at a suggestion from the federal regulations that progress reports can be sent home, for example, as often as report cards are. Well, most districts have taken that suggestion or that example from the federal regulations and say, oh, okay, well, whenever report cards go home, that's when we'll send a progress report. Well, what I'm finding is so many schools are not giving report cards very often. Some schools give a report card in January and then in May. Well, if you wait for half a year to go by before you find out whether or not things are working well, you have lost and your child has lost so much time. So again, you can individualize not only the content of the progress report, but you can individualize, make sure it's in writing in the IEP, how frequently you get the progress report. It doesn't have to just come home when the report cards come home. So what I've had different parents do, recently we were at an IEP meeting and the parent said, this school is on a trimester system. That means I have to wait 12 weeks before I get the progress report. That's way too long for us to know what's working well, what's not working, and make adjustments. So she requested that the IEP team write in that instead there be monthly progress reports. Well, the IEP team wasn't willing to do that, but what they did do, which is pretty much the same thing, is they said, we'll give you monthly reports on an update of what your child is doing, what things are going well, what things need to be changed, and then we'll still give you the formal progress report at the trimester time. So, in fact, she got what she needed to help her child. She's going to get a monthly report, whether or not you call it a progress report or an update. But the important part is that she's now going to get monthly communication from the school about how things are going. And I think oftentimes we look at progress reports of if things aren't going well, what we need to change. But the reality is you also want to know what strategies are really working, because you want to continue with those. So progress reports should help us know, the strengths that your child has, what is working, and how we can use those strategies in other places in the school building. If one teacher has, figured out a behavior intervention that works really well, we want to make sure that other teachers or in other places in the building that they're using that behavior strategy also. Another example of what you can do to individualize the frequency of your progress reports is there was another situation where I was helping advocate for a family, and what that IEP team decided to do is instead of writing a monthly report, they thought it would be more helpful for the teachers that directly work with the student and the parents to sit down at a face-to-face meeting once a month. And they put a 30-minute time limit on it, so both staff and parents knew that there was only going to be a certain block of time. But 30 minutes is really a nice chunk of time, and especially if you're doing it once a month with the teachers. And, you're going to be asking them to do something that they don't normally do. They don't normally have parents coming in and asking for individualized progress reports. So I would say, Tracy, as you go to your meeting this afternoon, you most likely would get some pushback. But I think, just to have dialogue with the IEP team and say, you're not trying to make this a burden on the staff, but you just want to be a partner with them. And it's really challenging for you to partner when you don't know exactly what your child's doing at school. So I hope those tips help. Let's see if Tracy or Sherry have any other questions here. Sherry says, next year for sure we'll ask for progress reports. My IEP doesn't have any as far as I can see right now. And, one of the things that I would be happy to do, Sherry, is if you want to, email me a copy of your child's IEP, and I can just quickly look and see if I can point out where they do or don't have the progress report. So, Sherry, if you just want to give me a private message, and I would be happy, just to look at that for you real quick. And let's see if we have. So Tracy says her meeting's at 2:30, and they don't have a draft. My son is in 10th grade, and I feel like he just gets passed through sometimes. I know, and it's so hard. And it's like, especially when they get to high school, it's like, how many years have we been doing this? But, I think you're going to the meeting. Obviously, you're just going to see the draft for the first time today. You might ask the team just for, a few minutes at the beginning of the meeting that you can, quickly kind of review that. It's really, really challenging to walk into a meeting and not have any time ahead of before, prior to the meeting to look at draft language. So in the future, what I would suggest, Tracy, is when the annual IEP is coming up, like about a month before that due date, I would just send an email to the special ed teacher and say, I know you're really busy. It just is really helpful, and it makes the meeting be more efficient if I could receive your draft IEP and, say 3 to 5 days, whatever you think is reasonable before the meeting. So now next May you're going to have another annual IEP. So just mark on your calendar or type it in your calendar on your phone a month before now, the beginning of April, ask for your draft IEP then. It makes a huge difference. And like I said, it makes the time be so much more efficient if you get a chance to look at that ahead of time. But we're going to all be sending Tracy positive vibes at 2:30 Mountain Time today, and say like, wahoo, we're going to be expecting good things happening for your son. And Tracy says, yes, and it's rush, rush, rush. Sign here and sign there. And please, know that you are not under pressure to accept everything and make all the decisions in one meeting. Especially, I've heard of some schools only giving parents 30 minutes for an IEP meeting. And even if you don't have any, areas that you disagree with, to go through a yearly plan in 30 minutes is pretty tough. Some schools will give parents an hour block of time, and then it's like they start looking at their watches or looking at their cell phones for what time it is, and they're like, oh, we have another parent waiting. Don't feel pressured. Go ahead and say, I understand that you have another, meeting scheduled. However, we just really haven't had time to do a great, thorough discussion. And so I'm requesting that we set up another time to meet. Of course, they would rather not do that, so they don't often offer you another time. But I would go in there, Tracy, and if you feel like you can't get through everything this afternoon, then near the time, the end of your time, just say, since we're all here with our calendars, let's see about scheduling a second meeting time, because that rush feeling, you walk out of there just like your head is, just kind of like spinning, like what just happened. And that's not the feeling that you want to have when you leave an IEP meeting. So always know that you can ask for an extension, and you've already started the IEP. So, legally they're protected as far as they've got their paperwork started. But don't let them pressure you into saying this is the only time that we can decide things and we need to wrap things up. And let's see if we have any other comments. And Tracy says, exactly. So far we've talked about having time where you can actually pop in the school building and make a visit or more formal observation of what's happening at school. And that gives you probably the best information if things are really being implemented like the IEP says. Our second strategy was to look at progress reports, not only what the content is of the progress report, but also how frequently you get those. And that can all be talked about and written into the IEP. So, if that's something that's really important and that you see as a priority, make sure that you talk about that at the meeting. So the third strategy that we're going to talk about is using effective homeschool communication tools. Now, I don't know, raise your hand. I won't see you raise your hand. But let us know in the comment box if you use a back and forth notebook, if you use some kind of communication log, and it can be daily, weekly. I'm just curious as to how many parents are currently using that. So if you have a communication log or a communication notebook, just let me know. Oh, and before I forget, so if we go back to our second strategy, and it's all about progress reports. The other thing I forgot to tell you is I've got this 2-page handout, and I have a copy right here. Let's see. But anyway, there's a 2-page handout that I've written for parents, and it's all about progress monitoring, which is what you need to do when you write progress reports. So there's 10 steps of progress monitoring that should be happening at school. And then the second page of the handout goes into the benefits of having frequent progress reports, but also this, and it's hard to see in this light, the second page also has 10 questions that parents can ask about progress reports. So if you'd like this, it's a free, 2-page handout that I've written for parents. If you'd like this, type progress in the comment box, and I'll come back afterwards and give you the PDF link so you can have that. So that tells you a whole lot more about progress reports than what we can do on our show today. So let's go back over to our third strategy in homeschool communication tools. Now, what I see is a lot of times these are like the progress reports where they hardly tell you anything. It's like, what? So I don't know if you've experienced it, but sometimes, you just get almost the same kind of note, he had a good day, he was happy, things went well. And it's like, wow, that doesn't really tell me much about what's happening. But what you need to do is figure out what information that you need from the teacher. Now, this is going to, be dependent on your child and what kinds of things are going to be helpful. Some parents need to know, because of a medical condition, they need to know exactly what their child ate during the day, what times he ate or drank, Some parents are working on a toilet training program, and they need to hear from the staff each day how many times the child was taken to the bathroom, if they went to the bathroom or not. Some parents just want to know about academics. What did he do in reading and math today? Some families want to know, if their child's getting therapy from a speech person or an occupational therapist or a physical therapist. It's like they hardly ever hear from the therapist. So those parents want some kind of feedback from the therapist in a weekly communication log. But your first step is to figure out what you want to know from the school. Some teachers have a typical communication log that they just use with all their students, and they've used it for 20 years. Well, that's great, but it might not meet the needs that you have. So again, this is something that you can talk about at the IEP meeting. It can be written in the accommodations, and you can be real specific, on a daily, in the daily communication log. It will reflect, what he ate, when he went to the bathroom, how he did on academics, what he did with his therapist at school. Whatever that information is, you want to make sure it's specified in the IEP, because if you just have homeschool communication log as an accommodation, they're not obligated to do anything more than and maybe what they've already done, which a lot of times isn't very helpful. The other thing I think to remember about communication logs is that it also should be information that the staff wants to know from you as a parent. I think so many times parents, want this, detailed information from the school staff, and they don't understand the real world of teaching and what it's like. So, but the other half of it is the staff would like to know things from the parents' point of view. So if your child, didn't sleep well at night, or if your child, was really rushed, didn't get out of bed, didn't have breakfast, those kinds of things you can jot down on the homeschool communication log. And then it's like a responsibility that you have as a parent to share that information with staff. What I've found in some situations is the staff or the parents can be really demanding on the staff all the information they want, and yet then when the staff asks the parent, can you jot down in the morning before he comes to school, just things like how well he slept, did he eat, what kind of mood is he in, the parents objected to doing things like that. So I think we have to meet staff halfway, and if we want them to share information with us, we should also be willing to share some information with them. And it's not like it has to be personal information, but just whatever, would be appropriate for the teacher to know about your child that morning. The other thing that we want to look at is finding that right balance of information that's going to be helpful, but to make it manageable for the teachers, because if we ask for too much as far as like narrative information, the reality is that probably isn't going to be a system that can continue every day. Teachers just don't have time for that. And as much as we would like to say, figure it out, we also have to be realistic. So what I like to try to do is figure out what information you want, and then see, is there a way that some of that can be conveyed to you in a checklist form? So for instance, if you need to figure out how many times they're taking your child to the bathroom, they could, write down some times that they typically, take your child, like every hour, or they could write down 9, 12, and 3 o'clock, and they can just check the times that they took your child to the bathroom. So they're not having to write sentences of like, well, at 9 o'clock we took, Johnny to the bathroom, and this is what happened, but they can just do some simple check boxes. There are some things that are going to happen that you can't really make into a checklist. So you do want some space on the communication log where the teacher can write some actual sentences and explain, what went on. And this is really, really helpful, I think, for all kids, but especially if your child doesn't use verbal speech and doesn't have the language skills to come home and share with you all the exciting things that they did that day. Depending on that daily communication log is something that's really critical. But again, you want it to be individualized. And I guess that's my mantra for the day is individualize, individualize. So that's that first I letter in IEP. And sometimes we forget about that. But it's not just what typically they offer. It's not just what their computerized IEP drop-down menu offers. But the progress reports, the accommodations, the communication log, all those components in your child's IEP need to be individualized, not just the goals, but each part of the IEP needs to be individualized for what your child needs and looking at the unique circumstances that are there with your child. So Marlo joined us. Marlo, yes, I love it. She says emails work better. And that's a really good point, because I think with technology these days, we have other alternatives than that paper pencil kind of communication log. So some teachers and some parents prefer email, and that's great because you get that written, paper trail. You can keep track of all the emails. Some teachers will prefer to text a parent, periodically during the day. The only thing about the texting is that I suggest that parents have some kind of an app on their phone so they can download the text and you do have that paper copy, because as you go along in the special education world, you'll probably hear a lot of people saying that you need things in writing, or if they're not in writing, they didn't happen. So emails give you that written paper trail. Text, if you have an app that you can download the text and print them out, gives you that paper trail. Another thing that teachers are doing, because, pretty much everybody's got a cell phone these days, is they'll take snapshots, during the day of your child doing, working on a certain project, or, showing, they can take an actual photo of a worksheet or, some project learning activity that they do and send that photo home, just text that email that photo to the parents. So that's another way that you can do homeschool communication. It doesn't have to be that standard form that we think of typically. Because we have cell phones, I've also seen teachers where they'll take, like a 20-second short video a couple times during the day. And that's really great because you can actually see, your child in real time, what they're working on at school, who they're working with. You can tell, was that in the special ed classroom? Was that in the general ed room? And so photos and videos can also be helpful. But again, just as a team, decide what method, email, paper copy, whatever, is going to work best, and specify that in the IEP. Don't just leave it as general. And that, I think, is, going to be really helpful. So Tracy says, great information. Thank you so much. So give us a thumbs up or a heart if you're liking what we're talking about so far. And Marlo says, I agree about sharing information as well. And I think she's referring to as far as the parents also sharing information back to the teachers. So this, today we've talked about 3 different strategies that will help you be more confident that the IEP is really being implemented the way it's supposed to be. One of those, I'll just kind of quickly go back here through our slides, but our first strategy that we talked about today was to actually be in the building and find clues that are going to help you know what's happening in your child's life every day at school. The second strategy that we talked about was improving what's written in progress reports and how often you get them. Our third strategy was looking at effective homeschool communication tools. And the other thing that I wanted to mention with the homeschool communication tools, there's an awesome article that I have. I didn't write the article, but I would love to share that with you. They give some really great specific examples of kind of thinking outside of the box for ways for teachers and parents to know what's happening at school. So if you would like the article about communication tools, just type in the word tools in the comment box and I'll come back and give you that link. I try to individualize these shows, so I try to think of additional resources, but I'm not, saying, oh, everybody wants this, everybody needs this. So if you want the 2-page handout about progress reports and how to understand those better, type in the word progress in the comment box. If you would like the handout, which is several pages long, about communication tools, just type in the word tools in the comment box. And I'm going to check to see if we have any other questions or comments. I wanted to let you know that next Thursday I'm going to be in a cabin for a few days with our family. We're doing like an extended Mother's Day weekend. So next Thursday I'm going to be in a place where I'm not going to have reliable Wi-Fi. What I'm going to do for our Thursday show next week is do an encore showing of an interview I did with Kathy Snow, who's a wonderful public speaker and author of Disability is Natural. So next Thursday at noon, our show will be the encore with Kathy Snow. And the following Thursday, I'm confirming a special guest that's worked at the Federal Department of Education. So I'm excited. I'll give you more details as all of that's confirmed. But until we see you again on our live show, make sure you like the Facebook page, Visions and Voices Together, so you get notified when we go live, so you can keep in touch where I'm making different Facebook posts throughout the week. And, share this with others. You can just use the share button and the video will be shared on your Facebook page. But any feedback I welcome. If there's other topics that you're interested in and want more information, I'll put up my slide that shows how you can get in touch with me. And Sherry, if you want to send me your child's IEP and I can just take a quick peek and see if it does say anything about progress reports, I'm happy to do that. So thank you for spending your lunch break or your time with us today. And until next time, keep on keeping on, because what you do is making a difference for your child and lots of other kids to come. So thank you and take care.